when the Coast Guard called me just past midnight asking why my yacht, the Silver Current, was 5 miles offshore with a dozen drunk strangers dancing on deck, I thought it was a prank. "Sorry, what?" I said, still half asleep, sitting up in bed. My phone glowed in the dark hotel room, the Seattle skyline faintly visible through the curtains. I'd just flown home from a week-long business trip, jet-lagged, exhausted, and very much not in the mood for jokes. "Sir," the officer said, his voice clipped and official, "your registered vessel was just boarded. There are no life vests, no licensed operator, and evidence of alcohol distribution without a permit. We need you at the Harborview Marina immediately." My heart slammed against my ribs. My boat, locked, sealed, and docked behind a private gate before I left town. There was no way. I threw on jeans, grabbed my keys, and bolted for the car. The 20-minute drive down the coast felt endless. Headlights bouncing across empty streets and the dark shimmer of the bay beside me. When I pulled into the marina lot, red and blue lights strobed across the water. The Silver Current was tied up, its white hull glowing under the harsh flashes. A group of partygoers, dresses, polo shirts, half-empty champagne bottles clustered on the dock. Faces pale and confused. I didn't recognize a single one. Then I saw her, standing with arms crossed, backlit by the deck lights like she owned the place. Margaret Langford, president of the Seabrook Dunes Homeowners Association. Late 50s, platinum blonde bob, and an expression that had permanently curdled into disdain. The self-appointed queen of our waterfront community. I walked straight toward the officers. "That's my boat," I said. "Ethan Graves. I didn't authorize any of this." One of the Coast Guard officers glanced at his clipboard. "Do you know this woman?" He nodded toward Margaret, who was now pretending not to see me. "Unfortunately," I said, "she runs our HOA." Margaret finally turned, her fake smile tight enough to crack glass. "Ethan," she said sweetly, "thank goodness you're here. We had to improvise tonight. The clubhouse renovations ran over schedule, so we decided to host the Seabrook Summer Gala somewhere." "More scenic. More scenic," I repeated. "You broke into my dock, my boat." "Technically," she interrupted, waving a manicured hand, "the HOA has shared access rights to community waterfront resources." I laughed, sharp and humorless. "That dock is not shared. It's deeded to my property. You know that." Her jaw tightened. "Well," she said, "maybe that's something the board should review." "Review?" I stepped closer. "You trespassed, threw an unlicensed party, and got boarded by the Coast Guard. You're lucky no one drowned." "You're being unreasonable," she snapped back. "If your vessel had been in compliance..." The lead officer cut her off. "Ma'am, you're not helping your case." For the first time, I saw her facade slip. She looked rattled. Then another officer approached and whispered something to his superior. The lead turned to me. "Mr. Graves will need an official statement. If you wish to press charges for unauthorized use of your vessel, now's the time." I looked straight at Margaret. Her face was pale now, her eyes darting for an escape that didn't exist. "Oh, I'm pressing charges," I said quietly. "And I'm not stopping there. By sunrise." I had already spoken to a maritime lawyer, filed a police report for grand theft, and handed over footage from a dock camera I'd installed months ago. The video showed everything. Margaret Langford unlocking the dock gate with a master key she wasn't supposed to have, waving in a catering crew, directing them aboard the Silver Current like it was her personal cruise ship. And worse, slipping small envelopes to two men later identified as the HOA treasurer, Douglas Kearns, and a maintenance contractor, Peter Lane. That wasn't just trespassing. It was collusion. Later that afternoon, I met with Detective Claire Holt from the county's Property Crimes Division. Her tone was calm but firm, her eyes sharp behind square glasses. She'd clearly seen her share of HOA nonsense. "Mr. Graves," she said, flipping through a folder, "we've verified your deed. That dock and vessel are privately owned. The association had zero legal authority to access them." I nodded grimly. "Based on your footage and the Coast Guard report," she continued, "we're preparing charges for unlawful entry, misappropriation of private property, and potentially insurance fraud." "Insurance fraud?" I asked, frowning. Holt leaned forward. "Your boat's security system? Was it active during the incident?" "It's linked to my home Wi-Fi. I disabled notifications while traveling to avoid roaming charges." "Why?" "Because the system was manually powered off from inside the cabin," she said. That's not a glitch. That's deliberate tampering. If your vessel sustained any damage— It did, I interrupted. Cabinet ripped out, upholstery stained, helm screen cracked. Then they're liable for damages, she said. And if anyone tried to file repairs through your insurance without disclosure of unauthorized use, that's fraud. I exhaled slowly. So what happens next? We're executing a warrant at the HOA office, Holt said, closing her folder. If what we think is true, Margaret Langford didn't act alone. This wasn't a spontaneous party. It was organized. When I got home, word had already spread. Linda Rogers, a neighbor 3 doors down, flagged me over as I parked. I overheard Margaret talking to Douglas last week, she said nervously. Something about using your boat for a community event. Nobody will care if it's one night, she said. Would you be willing to give that statement to Detective Holt? I asked. Linda hesitated, then nodded. Yes, if it helps. As I thanked her, a white SUV bearing the HOA logo rolled slowly past my house. Inside sat Janice Miller, Margaret's enforcer. The same woman who once fined me for improper flag display because my American flag tilted during a storm. She met my eyes, then drove on without stopping. Pathetic. Intimidation by minivan. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a mug of black coffee and the HOA bylaws spread out before me. I'd never bothered to read them before, just paid dues, stayed invisible. But now, every clause mattered. And that's when I found it. Appendix D, Section 9. No member of the board shall engage in use of privately owned property for community purposes without written consent from said owner, regardless of proximity or perceived benefit. Violation is grounds for immediate removal pending quorum vote. My lips curled into a smile. I wasn't just going to press charges. I was going to remove her. Margaret Langford had spent most of her adult life controlling other people's chaos. At least, that's what she told herself. In her mind, Seabrook Dunes wasn't just a community. It was her masterpiece. The gleaming lawns, the freshly painted mailboxes, the approved exterior color palettes, all of it a reflection of her discipline and vision. Without her, the place would rot into a playground for neglectful homeowners and tacky Christmas inflatables. She'd ruled the HOA for 11 years. 3 re-elections, 2 by unanimous vote. Fear, she'd learned, was the most efficient campaign tool. But that night at the marina, the flashing lights, the shouting, the Coast Guard boarding a boat she had borrowed, something in her control began to fracture. Margaret sat in her living room the next morning, the soft hum of her air purifier the only sound. The scent of sea salt and lavender candles filled the space. Her hands trembled slightly as she stirred her tea, the porcelain clinking against the saucer. Her phone buzzed. Douglas Kearns, HOA treasurer, and her longtime co-conspirator. Don't panic, he said the moment she answered. His voice was shaky, which made her panic even more. The Coast Guard impounded the damn boat, Doug, she hissed. Do you have any idea how bad this looks? It was supposed to be harmless, he said. A few donors, a few drinks. No one was supposed to call the feds. No one was supposed to see it. She snapped. He wasn't even supposed to be in town. Margaret paced the room, her heels clicking across marble. The thought of Ethan Graves' face, that self-righteous glare at the marina, made her jaw clench. He'd always been a problem. Quiet, observant, the kind of man who kept receipts for everything. She had hoped his job kept him away long enough to keep him irrelevant. Apparently not. Listen, Douglas said nervously. The board's already asking questions. Janice says the detective's been calling. They're looking at our accounts. Margaret's pulse spiked. They can't look at anything without a warrant. They have a warrant, Douglas said quietly. For a moment, the room spun. She gripped the edge of the counter. Margaret prided herself on always being 3 moves ahead. She didn't panic. She planned. Within an hour, she'd cleared her email inbox, deleted a handful of incriminating messages, and texted her assistant to take a few days off. The Windward Coastal Enrichment Fund, her so-called non-profit arm of the HOA, had been her brainchild. A clever cover for the extra fees she and Douglas collected from inflated contractor invoices, landscaping upgrades, dock maintenance, beautification grants, words that meant nothing but looked professional on paper. Most homeowners never questioned it. They just wanted tidy hedges and working pool heaters. The gala on Ethan's boat had been her idea, a way to impress two out-of-town investors who had been funneling funds through the enrichment account. They weren't exactly investors, but they paid well and asked no questions. Then the Coast Guard showed up. By late afternoon, she was sitting in her office at the HOA headquarters, the blinds drawn. Janice Miller hovered by the door like a nervous dog. "They're here," Janice whispered. "County detectives. They've got papers." Margaret's throat went dry. Detective Claire Holt walked in, calm, confident, and all business. "Ms. Langford," she said, "we have a warrant to search HOA financial records and digital correspondence." Margaret forced a smile. "Of course, Detective. We have nothing to hide." "Good," Holt said, "because your treasurer's already talking." Margaret's composure faltered for the first time. "Douglas?" "He's been cooperative," Holt said. "Claims you directed the event and authorized expenses through the enrichment fund." "That's absurd," Margaret snapped. "Douglas handled finances. I just approved what the board recommended." "Sure," Holt said evenly. "We'll see what your emails say." The detective turned to her team. "Start with the servers." Margaret sank into her chair as uniformed tech officers unpacked laptops and hard drives. Her kingdom was being dissected one file at a time. By evening, she was back home, pacing the kitchen, wine glass trembling in her hand. Her husband, Paul, sat silently at the counter, watching her unravel. "They can't prove anything," she muttered. "Everything was board approved. Everything." Paul sighed. "Maggie, you broke into that man's boat." "It wasn't his boat," she shot back. "It's part of the shared marina. It's deeded to him." Paul's voice rose for the first time in years. "You've gone too far this time." Margaret froze. Her husband had never raised his voice to her. Not once. He stood shaking his head. "I warned you this HOA obsession would eat you alive." Then he walked out, leaving her alone with her reflection in the glass door, perfect hair, perfect suit, eyes rimmed red with fear. 2 days later, Margaret sat in her SUV outside the HOA office, engine running, phone pressed to her ear. Douglas wasn't answering. Janice had gone quiet too. The local news headline on her dashboard screen read, "Coastal HOA under investigation for misuse of resident funds." The walls were closing in. She stared at her trembling hands. She'd spent years cultivating influence, power, the illusion of respect. And now it was unraveling because of one man and his stupid yacht. Margaret looked at the plane ticket on the passenger seat, a one-way to Arizona. Officially, it was for a wellness retreat. In reality, it was an escape plan. She'd already transferred a few key accounts, packed a bag and set her phone to airplane mode. As she pulled out of the lot, a familiar car passed, Ethan's black sedan, headed toward the community center. He didn't look at her, but the timing was no coincidence. He was calling a special meeting. Margaret's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "You think you can take this from me?" she whispered under her breath. "You have no idea what you've started." The marina lights glimmered faintly in her rearview mirror as she drove away, the horizon swallowing the last trace of her composure. For the first time in her reign, Margaret Langford wasn't leading a community, she was running from it. Detective Claire Holt didn't believe in coincidences. In her 10 years with the County Property Crimes Division, she'd seen every flavor of suburban corruption imaginable: forged permits, HOA embezzlement, real estate kickbacks. But this one smelled different. The boat incident, as the report called it, should have been a simple trespassing case. A bored homeowner's president throws a party, gets caught, pays a fine, everyone moves on. But the deeper she dug into the Seabrook Dunes Homeowners Association, the stranger it got. The financial statements looked too clean. The board meeting minutes were too perfect. And the money trail, that was almost too organized. By Tuesday morning, Claire was standing in front of a whiteboard in her precinct office, sipping lukewarm coffee while flipping through transaction logs. On the board, she'd written 3 names in bold: Margaret Langford, Joe President; Douglas Kearns, Treasurer; Ethan Graves, Victim, Boat Owner. Underneath, a web of arrows connected them to contractors, vendors, and a shell charity account labeled Windward Coastal Enrichment Fund. "Windward Coastal," she muttered. "Enrichment, my ass." Her partner, Detective Mark Salazar, leaned against the file cabinet. "Looks like your average laundering setup," he said. "Overbill the homeowners, filter payments through dummy vendors, skim off the top." "Yeah," Claire said, pointing to one name, Harborstone Maintenance LLC. "Except this vendor doesn't exist. Fake address, disconnected number. It's been paid over $300,000 in 2 years." Mark whistled. "That's a lot of lawn care." "More like money care," Claire said dryly. That afternoon, Claire and Mark visited the HOA office, now sealed under evidence tape. The air inside smelled of printer toner and perfume. Margaret's desk was immaculate, every pen aligned, every paper filed. But Holt's gut told her it was staged. She slid open the bottom drawer and found a black binder labeled Community Enrichment Reports. Inside, invoices, copies of checks, and, jackpot, handwritten notes. Some in Margaret's sharp cursive, others in block letters. One page stood out. Gala confirmed. Secure location, Graves Dock. No paper trail. Douglas to handle funds. Peter to manage setup. Claire stared at it. She actually wrote this down. Amazing. Mark grinned. Gotta love arrogance. Always leaves a breadcrumb trail. Holt photographed everything, bagged the binder, and checked the desktop computer. Ite had already cloned the hard drive, but she noticed one odd detail. The recycle bin was empty. Completely. "Wiped?" Mark asked. "Too clean," Claire said. "She scrubbed this before we got the warrant." Still, digital forensics rarely missed much. Once the tech team pulled metadata, they'd see what was deleted, and when. 2 days later, the preliminary results landed on her desk. Deleted emails, dated 6:14 a.m., the morning after the Coast Guard incident. Subject lines: fund adjustments, special donors, marina access keys. But one attachment caught her attention. Seabrook, Development Proposal, PDF. It wasn't just a fundraising brochure, it was a land use plan. A proposed Seabrook Marina expansion marked with new commercial docks, luxury condos, and a restaurant strip. The developer's name, Kirkland Shoreline Investments, LLC, and the listed community contact, Margaret Langford. Claire's brow furrowed. This wasn't just about embezzlement, it was insider manipulation. Margaret had been negotiating deals on behalf of the HOA to sell communal land for profit. That evening, Claire sat across from Ethan Graves in a small interview room. He looked composed, but his eyes were tired, the kind of exhaustion that comes from righteous anger held too long. "You were right," she said. "It wasn't just about your boat." Margaret was tied to a private development firm. They wanted to expand the marina. Your dock, your property, was a key part of that plan. Ethan's jaw tightened. "She was going to sell my property." "Not officially," Claire said. "But the proposal implies your section was going to be integrated into community water space, corporate speak for stolen through zoning manipulation." He exhaled slowly. "Unbelievable. And the board signed off? Some of them probably didn't know. Others, like Douglas Kearns, definitely did." Ethan nodded. "You think she's running?" Claire shrugged. "She's been off-grid for 48 hours. Credit cards inactive. Husband says she took his car. If she crosses state lines, it becomes federal." Ethan smirked faintly. "You sound like you almost want her to." Claire returned the smirk. "Would make the paperwork easier." The next morning, Holt received a call from a federal liaison she knew from joint investigations. Special Agent Ryan McConnell with the Department of Housing and Urban Affairs, HUD's Criminal Enforcement Unit. "Got your message about Seabrook Dunes," he said. "Funny thing, we've been tracking similar HOA fraud in 2 other counties. Same shell companies, same enrichment fund structure." "So it's bigger than Langford," Claire said. "Much bigger," McConnell replied. "And you're Margaret Langford. She's not just an overzealous president. She's a middle link in a money laundering pipeline tied to land deals across the coast." Claire leaned back in her chair, the weight of it sinking in. "What's our play?" "Keep building the local case," McConnell said. "We'll coordinate. If she's trying to flee, we'll catch her on interstate surveillance." "Good," Claire said, "because she's not getting away with this." By Friday evening, Claire's office looked like a crime mapping lab. The whiteboard now stretched across 2 walls, red string connecting HOA accounts, shell vendors and offshore transfers. She highlighted one name. Peter Lane, maintenance contractor. The man who helped set up the illegal gala. Phone records showed multiple calls between him and a prepaid number traced to Phoenix, Arizona. Claire's eyes narrowed. That's where she's going. Mark looked up from his notes. You sure? Positive, she said. And if she's headed there, she's not alone. Peter's her logistics guy. He'll have fake IDs, burner phones, maybe cash. She grabbed her jacket. Let's notify McConnell. If they intercept her in Arizona, this could tie off 3 cases at once. Hours later, as the office emptied and night fell, Claire stood by her window overlooking the bay. The marina lights shimmered like a reflection of the web she'd been unraveling, a network of greed hiding behind community smiles and HOA newsletters. She thought of Ethan Graves, his quiet determination, his refusal to let this die. Most homeowners would have just ranted on social media or sold their house. But he'd fought. She admired that. Her phone buzzed. A text from McConnell. Arizona Highway Patrol intercepted subject, female in custody, name, Margaret Langford. Claire smiled faintly. Gotcha. But deep down she knew the arrest wasn't the end. It was the start of something much larger, because every fraud left shadows. And in Seabrook Dunes, the shadows were spreading. Special Agent Ryan McConnell had seen small-town corruption before, but rarely one this clean. Most criminal networks were messy. Digital fingerprints everywhere, emails, offshore leaks. But the Seabrook Dunes file Claire Holt sent him looked like it had been designed by someone with a background in government accounting. Neat, deliberate, and precise. He'd been with the Department of Housing and Urban Affairs Office of Inspector General for 9 years, specializing in financial crimes linked to housing developments, HOA scams, mortgage laundering, land misuse. All of it passed through his desk eventually. But this one carried a scent of coordination. Margaret Langford was no mastermind. She was a cog, and Ryan knew how to find the machine. 3 days after her arrest, McConnell sat in an interrogation room at the Phoenix field office, watching Margaret through a 2-way mirror. She looked smaller than he expected, tired, frayed, stripped of the suburban armor that once made her untouchable. Her lawyer sat beside her, whispering strategy. Ryan opened the door and stepped inside. Ms. Langford, he said, voice calm, even friendly. I'm Special Agent Ryan McConnell. We appreciate your cooperation. Margaret smirked faintly. That what you call arresting me on a highway? Routine procedure, Ryan replied. We had reason to believe you were fleeing across state lines. But if you'd like to help us understand the bigger picture, we can make this easier. Her eyes flickered. What bigger picture? Ryan set a folder on the table and opened it to a page showing the Windward Coastal Enrichment Fund account, followed by 2 others. Blue Mariner Development Trust and Ridgeway Civic Renewal Project. All 3 accounts share identical routing patterns, he said. Same shell vendors, same ghost contractors, and each managed by a different HOA president in a different county. Margaret's smirk faltered. You weren't the only one, Ryan continued softly. But you might be the only one left who can talk. Her lawyer started to object, but she raised a hand. What happens if I do? Ryan leaned back. Depends on what you give us. Later, as the interrogation continued, Margaret admitted to meetings with a man known only as Garrison, no last name, no company listed, but he represented investment groups interested in buying coastal HOA-controlled land. She said he'd promised campaign donations, consulting fees, even a board seat at a regional development coalition. Ryan had heard it before, a front for laundering real estate profits into legal channels. When the meeting ended, he stepped out into the hallway where Detective Holt waited. Well? She asked. She's cracking, Ryan said. Claims she was recruited. Said Garrison met her in person last March at a conference in Portland. Claire folded her arms. Portland? That's where the Ridgeway Civic case started. They lost their HOA treasurer 2 months ago. Apparent suicide. Ryan's brow furrowed. You think it's connected? I think it's too coincidental not to be. 2 days later, Ryan flew to Portland with a small task force. The trail led to a boutique real estate consultancy called North Harbor Advisory, registered to a luxury office downtown. On paper, it handled zoning negotiations for waterfront communities. In reality, it funneled HOA beautification grants into offshore accounts disguised as development fees. When Ryan entered the office, He found it empty, blinds half closed, computers wiped. Whoever Garrison was, he'd cleared out fast. But he missed one thing, a document shred bag, half full, waiting for disposal. Ryan pulled on gloves and carefully extracted a page, a corporate letterhead, a signature line. North Harbor Advisory, authorized regional partner, Kirkland Shoreline Investments, LLC, the same developer from Seabrook Dunes. Ryan's pulse quickened. Got you. That night, Ryan sat in his hotel room piecing together the puzzle on his laptop. Each of the 3 HOAs, Seabrook Dunes, Ridgeway Civic, and Clearwater Bluffs, had funneled money through shell enrichment, funds to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. Each HOA had signed identical land use partnership agreements with North Harbor Advisory, and each was being prepped for redevelopment by Kirkland Shoreline Investments. It wasn't just a fraud ring. It was a network, a corporate laundering pipeline hidden behind HOA bureaucracy and local zoning boards. He typed a note to himself. Objective: follow the money back to Kirkland Shoreline. Identify Garrison. Hypothesis: developer network using HOA presidents as unwitting or willing intermediaries. He paused, staring at the name Kirkland Shoreline Investments. The CEO's name was redacted in every public record he checked. Only initials, AG. He frowned. Garrison. The next morning, Ryan briefed Claire Holt over a secure call. This goes deeper than state level, he said. HUD's been tracking similar shell transfers across the entire Pacific corridor. Oregon, California, Washington. Seabrook Dunes was one of their feeder HOAs. Feeder? Claire asked. Think of it like a spider web, Ryan said. Each HOA collects community funds, skims a cut, then channels it through enrichment projects into Kirkland Shoreline accounts. On paper, it's civic improvement. In practice, it's laundering millions. Claire exhaled. So Margaret wasn't the boss. She was the puppet. Exactly. And whoever's pulling the strings knows how to stay hidden. That afternoon, Ryan's analyst emailed him a new lead, a flight manifest showing a private jet chartered by Kirkland Shoreline 2 days before Margaret's arrest. The destination, Vancouver, Canada. Passenger name, Andrew Garrison. Ryan's gut tightened. He's real. And worse, he was already gone. 2 weeks later, Ryan sat in a federal briefing room in D.C. The Seabrook case had officially been reclassified as part of Operation Tidefall, a multi-agency task force investigating HOA corruption and real estate laundering across the West Coast. As slides of the suspects flashed on the projector, Ryan's focus stayed on one image, Margaret Langford in custody, pale and defiant. Holt's voice echoed in his head from their last call. She's not done talking. Margaret had already agreed to a plea deal, reduced sentence in exchange for information on the network. And she hinted at one final explosive secret before the call ended. You think Garrison's the top? You're wrong. Someone higher signs the checks. Someone inside your own department. Ryan hadn't told his team that part yet, not until he knew if it was true. He stared at the case file. The numbers didn't lie, but people did. And if Margaret was right, this wasn't just an HOA scandal. It was a federal betrayal. Samantha Reed didn't believe in coincidences, not in law, and definitely not in money. She'd been practicing for 12 years, long enough to know that people rarely accidentally commit crimes involving six-figure transfers and offshore accounts. You had to plan that kind of corruption, and the HOA at Seabrook Dunes? It had been planned like a Swiss watch. The morning after Agent McConnell briefed her on Margaret Langford's cooperation deal, Samantha sat at her cluttered office desk downtown, reviewing the newest batch of evidence, invoices, email chains, and the HOA's internal memos. Every document smelled like fraud. Invoices from a landscaping company that didn't exist. Payments to environmental consultants with P.O. boxes instead of offices. And the same contractor signature appearing on 3 different documents, all dated on the same day. Sloppy. Too sloppy for the kind of operation Ryan McConnell had described. Which meant these weren't the masterminds. They were cleanup crew. Her phone buzzed. Ethan Morgan. She answered immediately. Morning, Ethan. You see the new reports? His voice was tense. The HOA fund transfers? Yeah. Looks like they've been siphoning money through shoreline rehabilitation projects for years. Half the invoices are fake. He let out a slow breath. Figures. I'm filing another complaint this week. My boat's fixed, but the marina's still a mess. Samantha smiled faintly. Don't worry. After the feds finish with them, you'll have the cleanest dock in the state. He chuckled, but there was fatigue in it. Any word on Margaret? She's cooperating, Samantha said carefully. But it's what she's not saying that worries me. What do you mean? Samantha opened a folder labeled North Harbor Advisory, Legal Review. She's admitted to laundering money for a guy named Garrison, but the contracts were signed by someone else. The authorization initials? SR. Ethan paused. SR?
Like you?
Samantha laughed once, humorless. No, but I think whoever's behind this wanted me blamed if things went south. I found forged digital signatures, mine, on 2 of their agreements. Somebody hacked my letterhead. Ethan cursed under his breath. You're kidding. I wish I were. She turned toward the window, looking down at the street below. And it gets worse. The timestamps on those contracts came from a device inside this building. That night, Samantha stayed late at her office, digging through archived email servers. Her firm, Reed, Callaway & Hines, handled real estate disputes, HOA litigation, and municipal compliance cases. Nothing worth breaking into. Until this one. Around 9:47 p.m., her office lights flickered. A power surge, brief but sharp enough to reboot her monitor. Then she heard something, a faint rustle from the hallway. Samantha froze, listening. The building was empty. Her assistant had left hours ago, and the cleaning crew didn't come until morning. She slowly reached for her phone and activated the camera app, recording as she stepped into the hallway. Nothing. Just the hum of fluorescent lights. Then she noticed it, a small piece of paper taped to her office door. She pulled it off carefully. In neat block handwriting, it read, "Stop digging or you'll join her." No signature. No logo, just threat. Her stomach turned. She snapped a photo of the note and texted it directly to Agent McConnell. The next morning, Ryan showed up in person, looking as grim as she'd ever seen him. "They know you're on to them," he said, glancing around her office. "We'll post surveillance until we figure out who's making threats." Samantha folded her arms. "Someone forged my credentials and now they're trying to scare me off." "That tells me I'm getting close." Ryan gave a thin smile. "That's why I like working with lawyers who don't scare easily." She arched an eyebrow. "Flattery doesn't get you subpoena immunity, Agent." He chuckled, then turned serious again. "We traced one of the shell accounts. It's registered in the name of a Delaware holding company, Sutton Ridge Holdings." Samantha blinked. "Wait, that's the same company that's been lobbying for zoning variances across the coast. They're the ones pushing for those fake redevelopment permits." "Exactly," Ryan said. "And guess who signed the most recent one?" He slid a document across her desk. At the bottom, in smooth, confident ink, was the signature, Andrew Garrison. Samantha read the document 3 times, every line dripping with legal misdirection. It was perfect, too perfect. She looked up. "He's using corporate law like a weapon. These contracts are airtight. If we challenge him directly, he'll tie us up in court for years." Ryan nodded. "Unless we find the weak point." Samantha smiled thinly. "Every shell company has one. You just have to know where to pry." Over the next week, Samantha built her case like a surgeon. She cross-referenced land deeds, corporate filings, and HOA bank records, looking for inconsistencies. Most of the entities, North Harbor, Sutton Ridge, Kirkland Shoreline, had one common registered agent, Lydia Hartwell, a name that appeared nowhere else. But Samantha recognized it. 2 years earlier, she'd represented a contractor in Clearwater who accused Hartwell of falsifying payment schedules for another HOA. The case disappeared when the client dropped the complaint under financial pressure. She picked up her phone and dialed. "Ryan, I found her, Lydia Hartwell. She's the pivot point. If we bring her in, Garrison's structure collapses." Ryan whistled. "Good work. We'll issue a subpoena." "Do it fast," Samantha said, "because if I found her, she already knows." That night, Samantha returned home past midnight. The note from earlier still weighed on her mind. She double-checked the locks and poured herself a glass of wine. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered, a man's voice calm and cold. You're very persistent, Ms. Reed. Her heart skipped. Who is this? Let's call me Garrison. She stayed silent, pulse racing. You're playing in a world you don't understand, he continued. You think this is about boats and HOA funds? It's bigger than that. Walk away. Then the line went dead. Samantha stared at her phone, knuckles white. She wasn't walking away. Not now. The next morning, she walked into Ryan's office and dropped a folder on his desk. Inside were notarized statements, bank transfer screenshots, and one critical discovery, a clause buried deep in the Seabrook Dunes Charter. All board-authorized financial disbursements must be ratified by the HOA's legal counsel or their proxy. Samantha pointed at it. They used my name because they needed a legal ratifier. If we prove that, we prove intent and conspiracy. Ryan grinned. You just gave us federal jurisdiction on a silver platter. That night, news broke on local TV. Federal agents raid offices of Sutton Ridge Holdings, multiple arrests made. Samantha sat on her couch, exhausted but satisfied. But as the camera panned over agents escorting Lydia Hartwell into a black SUV, Samantha noticed something chilling. A man standing across the street, wearing sunglasses, watching the scene unfold. Even from the grainy footage, she recognized him, Andrew Garrison, smiling, still free. Ryan McConnell hadn't slept properly in weeks. The walls of his temporary field office were covered with photos, Lydia Hartwell's arrest mugshot, aerial photos of the marina, and financial flowcharts linking Sutton Ridge Holdings to 7 other HOA communities across the eastern seaboard. Each red line on the wall told a story of fraud, coercion, and greed. But one line remained unfinished, the one leading to Andrew Garrison. Despite Samantha Reed's airtight evidence and multiple raids, Garrison had vanished. His bank accounts were frozen, his companies dismantled, yet somehow he was always one step ahead. Like a ghost in an expensive suit. It was 3:15 a.m. when Ryan's phone buzzed. A text from an encrypted contact. If you want Garrison, come alone. Pier 7040 LH. He stared at the message. Lydia Hartwell. She was in federal custody, unless someone had her phone. Pier 7 was empty except for the rhythmic clinking of boat masts and the low hum of sodium lights flickering above the docks. The fog rolled in thick and damp, carrying the scent of salt and diesel. Ryan stepped out of his car, hand on his holster. Then he saw her, Lydia Hartwell, standing near the edge of the pier, hair disheveled, wrists free. Agent McConnell, she said quietly, her voice shaking. He's watching us. Ryan's instincts screamed trap. Who? Garrison. He's here. He made me. The crack of a gunshot split the silence. Lydia jerked backward, collapsing before she could finish the sentence. Ryan dropped to the ground, weapon drawn. A shadow moved among the boats. Don't be a hero. Agent, a calm voice called out from the mist. You're out of your depth. Ryan fired twice into the fog, but the figure was already gone, footsteps fading down the dock. When he checked Lydia's pulse, it was gone, but clutched in her hand was a folded scrap of paper, soaked with blood. He opened it. One line, scrawled in trembling handwriting, check your own house. By sunrise, Ryan was at the Bureau's internal security office. The message had rattled him. He requested access logs for the investigation database, the one containing sealed evidence. When the results appeared on the monitor, his chest tightened. The most recent unauthorized access had come from inside the task force, from an agent named Marcus Dean, his own second-in-command. Ryan exhaled slowly, anger rising. Marcus had been with him since the start of Seabrook. He was the one who'd volunteered for surveillance, handled witness protection, even coordinated with Samantha. It all made sense now. The failed raids, the missed leads, the vanishing witness transport. Marcus had been feeding information to Garrison. That evening, Ryan met Samantha and Ethan at a quiet diner off the interstate. Both looked worn but determined. Samantha slid a folder across the table. Lydia's last file dump before she died. Offshore transfers routed through an account labeled MD Securities. Ethan frowned. Marcus Dean? Ryan nodded grimly. Our inside man. Samantha's voice hardened. Then we end this, tonight. They set the trap at the federal storage facility where confiscated HOA documents were kept. Marcus believed he was meeting Garrison's courier to retrieve a hard drive. Instead, he found Ryan waiting. Marcus froze at the doorway, face pale. "Ryan, this isn't what you think." Ryan raised his gun. "Drop it now." But Marcus only smiled. "You don't get it. Garrison owns more than marinas and shell companies. He owns people, senators, judges. You can't stop this." Samantha stepped out from behind a shelf, recorder in hand. "That's enough for me," she said. "Confessions on tape." Marcus's expression flickered, panic, then resolve. He reached for his weapon. A single shot echoed through the metal corridors. Marcus crumpled before he could fire. Ryan stood motionless, smoke curling from his gun. His jaw tightened. It's over. But it wasn't. 2 days later, Ryan received a secure package. No return address. Inside was a USB drive and a single note. "Good men follow orders. Great men change them. AG." The drive contained an encrypted video file. When he opened it, Garrison's face appeared, calm, polished, charismatic as ever. "Agent McConnell, by now you've cleaned your house and I commend you. But corruption isn't a person. It's a system. Seabrook Dunes was just one branch. You cut it off, but the roots remain. I'll be watching the next tree you plant." Then the screen went black. Weeks passed. Arrests were made. News outlets called it the Seabrook HOA scandal, a historic bust exposing fraud in coastal communities across 4 states. Margaret Langford was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. Lydia Hartwell's death was ruled a homicide. Marcus Dean's betrayal made headlines for days, but Andrew Garrison was still missing. Ethan rebuilt his boat, restoring it to its old shine. Samantha opened a new firm, one specializing in community law reform. Ryan transferred to the Bureau's anti-fraud division, still haunted by the fog and the whispering threat of the man who vanished into it. One quiet evening, months later, Ryan stood at the docks of Seabrook. The sun was setting, orange light spilling over calm waters. Ethan's boat, the Resolute, bobbed gently in the tide. Samantha joined him, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Still thinking about him?" she asked. Ryan nodded. "Yeah, Garrison's still out there." "But so are we." She smiled faintly. "Then maybe that's enough." He looked at the horizon, peaceful, but only on the surface. "Maybe," he said. "For now." Epilogue. 6 months later, in a luxury marina in the Bahamas, a man in a linen suit stepped aboard a new yacht registered under the name Blue Meridian. He adjusted his sunglasses, handed a passport to the dockhand, Andrew Garrison, though the name read Alexander Grant. As the yacht pulled away, he poured himself a drink and smiled.